Hi, Abraham. I'm really glad you picked me. I've been thinking about this question for the last probably 10 days or 11 days. And this has to do with the world crisis. And I have been looking around and trying to see things good things that have come out of this. And I've seen the patriotism and the signs, God bless America, and I've seen people actually being significantly more friendly to everybody. And I think those are great things that have come out of this. But there's still a lot of things that I don't understand. And one of those is, we'll just talk about the World Trade Centers and why those people were targeted. And even if I believe that they are a positive stream of energy and that life goes on and that we shouldn't be attached to our physical bodies and that life goes on. How do you...
She's trying to give us all of the answers that she knows we'll give back to her.
Okay, I'm trying to get,
and they're very well done.
But what I don't understand is then you look at the families and how, if it was me and I lost family members there, well, you'd like to look and say, those people are moving on. It's still so hard for these families. How do you, is it the families that were negative, or is it the people that were in the towers that were so negative that they were targeted? That's what I don't understand.
Well, we're going to answer this question for you fully. But before we do, we want to lay a little bit of basis here. And we want to ask you a question or two. And we are in no way wanting to appear insensitive to the dramatic events that you are talking about. But for just a moment, when you said, what were your opening words?
I think that
I want to talk about
the world crisis.
We almost said to you, to which world crises are you referring?
Okay.
Because this is a recent one, and this is a big one. And it is a source of much pain and anguish for many. Do you think that someone whose husband or daughter was in one of those buildings is suffering more than someone whose dear one was killed in traffic today? Or
actually I do, and I'll tell you why.
Yes.
Because I think that because of the way it happened, I think people feel their security, which we've never had to deal with in the United States.
But that's now you're on another topic. In other words, we're first just wanting to address the topic that you brought forth, which was the
death,
the sadness of a large number of people who are affected by the specific deaths that took place in that tragedy. And the thing that we're wanting to help you to isolate just a little bit is that physical humans are not coping well with death at all, even though death happens all around you every single day.
Mm-hmm.
And we're not going to replay statistics to you. You have enough people that are doing that for you. But there are all kinds of things that are happening to all kinds of people, and all kinds of people in their lives' experiences are having to find ways of coping with that. And so as far as addressing that issue, do we really need to? Or is it enough to say, relative to the subject of unexpected death, that nobody likes it?
Yeah, I would say that's acceptable.
So now let's move on to the other thing that you're talking about. Bring it to us.
Why were those people targeted? How could there be so many people in one place? Was it them having negative thoughts that attracted them to this, or could people still be very positive and still have this whole thing happen? Well, and I think I'm talking about the physical person that was in the tower.
We will say to you powerfully, you've heard it before, but we will say it and apply it specifically to this. Nothing ever happens to any experience that is outside of law of attraction ever, 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 ever. And the conclusion that many jump to when they hear us say something like this, because of their hang-ups about the subject of death and their determination to always make it a bad thing, is that, therefore, these people must have been disconnected without exception, and in a very bad way disconnected, and therefore they attracted this particular experience to them. And we would say, because death is not the terrible thing that all physical beings make it out to be, it is not that way. And you also have to factor in an understanding that there are actually physical beings that are making decisions from broader perspective and even human physical perspective to, in other words, when you think about the subject of death, almost everyone in human form who approaches it believes that the idea of going toward death must have meant the resisting of well-being. And when you think about the opposite of resisting of well-being is the allowing of utter well-being. And when you think about what death is, it is the allowance of utter well-being. So you have to realize that there are all kinds of things. If you could sit and visit with each and every one of those physical beings who made their transition during that time, you would find thousands of different balances of intentions within that. And we would say to you, without exception, every one of them is exactly right. Now, you're already beginning to hear all kinds of stories. Someone said in one of the interviews that was passing over the airwaves, if there were how many people potentially in those two buildings, what are the numbers?
50,000.
50,000 people. Now, this happened on a Tuesday morning in the middle of what would be business time. And even when you are looking at those percentages, many of the people that by all rights should have been there weren't. Would you agree to that?
And people walked out that were on the 101st floor. So, I mean, you know, it's amazing how...
And so rather than trying to find reason, which would take a tremendous amount of surveying in order to satisfy your question, accept, if you want to, that law of attraction is always sorting those things out. Now, when you say, why was this building targeted? We would say to you...
I wouldn't say the building. I would say, why were those people? I mean, they physically all were in that building, but I...
Well, that is why we are giving a little different terminology.
Okay.
We would say, why was the building targeted?
Okay.
Because it was the building that was targeted, not people. Because it is representing world trade. In other words, even the babies are saying... that is not a hard thing to figure out. In other words, it was a symbol of your economic prowess. And so...
So it wasn't the people in the building attracting
Let us ask you another question, just to sort of get this into some sort of perspective. Has this particular location been targeted before? Yes. And so, do you believe that there was any understanding about the vulnerability of such a building? And do you believe that those who were participating within the building had any conscious awareness of that? And do you believe that any of them made any decisions around that? And do you believe that any of them could have found vibrational harmony with more of that, even as a result of being there? In other words, and so it's like sometimes a person will say to us, well, I fell and broke my foot, and it was so annoying to me. And then, wouldn't you know, before it even got better, I fell and broke my other foot, and then I broke my elbow, and then and they say, why are these things happening? And we say, well, the first one happened in response to a vibration that was within you that you weren't recognizing. But after you had that first broken foot, and you walked around all day feeling the trauma of that first broken foot, then it's not so hard to understand how the second one came and the third one came. And so, not wanting to be light about the tragedy, although we would recommend that all of you try to lighten up about it, that is a similar thing that happened there. In other words, the emitting of the vibration around it.
Now, would you say in moving forward, I know a lot of us are, you know, everyone's expecting retaliation. Is it better for us to, it's almost like your roadkill example where, you know, you see the dog on the street, and if you just drive by, it doesn't affect you. But if you stop and look, it can affect you.
Well, we would withdraw our attention from
it.
Because
but this is like seeing 1,000 dogs on the street. I mean, it's just right. It's in front of everyone's face, and it's
very big.
It's so hard.
Very big, and as we said earlier, we recognize that it is not the easiest time. In fact, it may be the hardest time for you to try to reach for thoughts that feel better, and yet it is always the remedy.
So just try to ignore it as much as you can.
When you talk about the retaliation, and we can feel many are wholeheartedly in support of it, there are those that sort of worry about it. actually the bombing of the towers in itself was an absolute retaliation. And so that was a retaliation, and now you'll offer a retaliation, and then someone will offer a retaliation. And we're not wanting you to feel any trauma over that. In other words, let's put this into perspective. It has always been this way. In other words, you see it in the most personal of experiences. In other words, bring us around to the specifics of your question, because there are endless directions that we could go with this. Specifically now,
how do we? What I think I'm trying to do is trying to find some more positive thoughts that I can think about.
What we're offering here may feel like some sort of negative stirrings in order to bring you some perspective about all. But we believe ultimately, as you listen here for a moment, your sense of well-being will come more dramatically into place. Very often, we've talked about this endlessly, physical beings say to us, if I had better conditions, I would feel better. And we do not disagree with that. But we have to say to you, as we feel the vibration that is being emitted from human consciousness, now hear this, it's going to help you. It's going to surprise you, but it's going to help you. The negative emitting that is happening today is not greater than the negative emitting that was happening on September the 10th. It's just about different subjects.
Okay.
You get in a sense, in other words, you say, oh, but this is such a big event, and all of us are pushing very hard against it. And we say, and before that, you were pushing against your neighbor, or you were pushing against your lover. And now you say, oh, we're all being very nice to each other. And we say, don't worry, it won't last. In other words, until you come to understand about allowing, those of you who are allowing will allow well-being under all conditions, and those of you who are not allowing are not. And there is much more pain being experienced by those of you who are watching the television and trying to replay and relive the grief than those who experienced it, you see. Now we're back around to those who have been personally touched by families, and certainly we are not saying to you that we are delighted that this has happened. It is not a good thing that it has happened, but it does not need to be the end of your civilization as you know it, nor would it be, or could it be. Nor does it need to be the end of your economic experience, nor will it be. Nor does it need to be the end of your joyful personal experience. And so now let's bring that back around. So here I am as a physical human being, and I say, I would feel much better if these conditions had not happened. And we say, we don't doubt that, but do not use those conditions as your excuse now to not allow yourself to return to joy. And there are many who are really on the bandwagon, in other words, of wanting to make this something, and many of them have good reasons, and we would not argue with any of the reasons. We would just say, it must be an individual choice for you whether you participate within it or not.